Hello, good morning everyone. Today we're going to continue with our walking through 2 Corinthians. So my bit that I've been asked to look at is 2 Corinthians 2, 9 to 13. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from verse 5 again, which Ruth looked at yesterday, because it all flows together quite nicely. So Paul is talking about why he hasn't gone back to visit them, and about some of the problems they've had in their church. So starting at verse 5. I am not overstating it when I say that the man who caused all the trouble and hurt all of you more than he hurt me. Most of you opposed him, and that was punishment enough. Now, however, it is time to forgive and comfort him. Otherwise he may be overcome by discouragement. So I urge you now to reaffirm your love for him. And verse 9. I wrote to you as I did to test you and see if you would fully comply with my instructions. When you forgave this man, I forgave him too. And when I forgive whatever needs to be forgiven, I do so with Christ's authority for your benefit, so that Satan will not outsmart us, for we are familiar with his evil schemes. When I came to the city of Troas to preach the good news of Christ, the Lord opened a door of opportunity for me. But I had no peace of mind because my dear brother Titus hadn't yet arrived with a report from you. So I said goodbye and I went on to Macedonia to find him. So that all, I thought, quite flowed together nicely. And Ruth yesterday talked about the bringing back of this one person that's caused problem with the church, and how the church had been, the majority of people had sided with Paul, but at the time nothing had been done, and then something has changed and Paul says, right, now you need to forgive this chap. And I thought Ruth did a really good job yesterday of covering that. So the bit I wanted to focus on today was a slight sidestep out of this. Whereas Paul says in verse 11, so that Satan will not outsmart us, for we are familiar with his evil schemes. And I thought we'd have a quick potted look at some of these schemes so that we won't be outsmarted. And the one that sprung to mind right at the beginning, the first one that sprung to mind was back in Genesis, when we've got this beautiful garden, everything's been named and created, and the devil turns up and says, did God really say? It was a subtle question. It wasn't you've been told that you can do anything, but I'm telling you something different. It was a slight deception. It was all about the words that were used. And it planted that seed of doubt into Adam and Eve's mind. And they questioned. But when they questioned, they didn't go back to God and say, did you really say? They sort of mulled it over themselves. Did God really say? And then they took a decision without asking God for help and advice. And we know the outcome of that because we're living in it. And it occurred to me that we're all disparate at the moment, and we're all living in our own little worlds, and things are gradually coming back together. But there's a risk that we can make decisions without consulting God, without consulting each other, and acting on our own. And sometimes we need the wisdom of other people, and we always need the wisdom of God as to how we're going to act. So there's a lesson here for us to not become deceived as best as we're able to, but to remember that there's a whole other host of people out there, there's 14 of us in all this morning, who could be sought for advice. And there's a whole church directory on Church Suite, and we can call our family and ask them for wisdom. And then the other one that sprung to mind was about the thief in the night coming to steal and destroy at the beginning of John, because we often identify that thief with the devil and the stealing and destroying. But and that sounds pretty bad, and we might feel vulnerable at the moment, and we might feel afraid. Burglaries, I believe, are down because everyone's at home all the time. But actually, in what's going on and what we may lose in terms of wealth and happiness, and it's tough. So we need to remember how we can get out of this. And again, one thing is we can always pray to God, and we can always turn to our friends. But biblically, the book of James says, if you resist the devil and you stand firm, then he will flee from you. And that's great, you say, Julian. Stand firm, resist the devil. How do I do that? Well, every year it seems there's a children's slot at church, and the children come out and they tell us all about the armour of God. It's a classic one. And think about that armour of God and how you can stand firm by wearing that armour of God. So I'd urge you today to have a quick flick through Ephesians 6 and think about how you can apply that to your lives and where you are right now, just as a reminder and encouragement, because we've been given all this stuff so that we can stay safe, because it's all part of God's grace towards us. He didn't just rescue us, he's made sure that once we're out of the raging torrent of water and sat on the riverbank, we're not going to fall back in again, to use an analogy that's got no biblical reference or isn't related to anything that we said. Okay, so that's my quick thought today, is how we can not be deceived, and how we can try and make sure we don't be afraid. And the encouragement again is to talk to our brothers and sisters in Christ, and then to pray, and then if need be, it can be escalated. The Bible contains a lot of helpful information, and I know that sometimes when I have a panic, I don't always think about these things. And sometimes it's easier to phone someone up and float ideas past them and say, help. But other times, because I'm a man probably, I don't always want to ask for help. And it's very easy to go into a spiral of, well, I don't know what to do. And so I will mull over things and maybe go down a blind alley. But because I'm in that blind alley, then I don't always choose the correct course. And so talking to other people is important. But as Paul writes in Ephesians, remembering that God can do immeasurably more than we can help or imagine is also really important as well.